The dinner table looked exactly the same as it always had, the same chipped ceramic bowl in the center, the same mismatched chairs my parents had collected over 20 years, the same smell of pot roast that my mother made every time she wanted to pretend everything was fine. My brother Marcus sat across from me, cutting his meat like a man without a single thing on his conscience, and my parents flanked him on both sides like bodyguards who didn't know they were already too late. I had been home for exactly 4 hours. 48 hours earlier, I had been in a hospital corridor in Doha, Qatar, finishing a 12-hour shift in the ICU, peeling off my gloves and thinking about nothing except a hot shower and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. I had been overseas for 19 months on a contract nursing position, the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice, the kind that pays off your student loans in a year and a half if you're disciplined enough to save. I was disciplined. I had been disciplined my entire life. That discipline had paid for my condo. It was a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a building in Phoenix, Arizona. Not flashy, not a mansion, but mine. I had saved for 3 years, put down a full 30%, and signed the papers the month before I left for Qatar. The plan was simple. Rent it out while I was overseas, let the rental income cover the HOA fees, and then some. Come back to an asset that had appreciated and a bank account that had grown. My property manager, a woman named Donna, sent me monthly reports like clockwork. The rent came in. The property was maintained. Everything was exactly where I left it, or so I believed. I noticed something was wrong before dinner even started. My mother hugged me too long at the door, not the warm kind of long, the guilty kind. My father kept clearing his throat and looking at the window. And Marcus, who normally greeted me with a jab about my flight being delayed or my hair looking tired, said nothing. He just smiled. It was the smile of someone holding a hand they think is unbeatable. I should have pressed right then. I should have said, "What is going on in this house right now?" But I was jet-lagged and hungry, and I told myself I was reading too much into it. 19 months of overnight shifts will make you see patterns in things that aren't there. I convinced myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. We were halfway through dinner when Marcus set his fork down, folded his hands on the table like a man about to deliver a presentation, and looked at me with something I can only describe as rehearsed warmth. "So," he said, "I have some news." My mother immediately looked at her plate. My father cleared his throat again. "I sold your condo," Marcus said. The room went completely quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes when someone says something surprising. The kind that comes when everyone at the table already knew. I put my glass down. "What did you just say?" "The market was insane in Phoenix this spring," he said, still using that calm, explanatory voice, like he was doing me a favor by narrating it slowly. "You were sitting on a gold mine. I got you $375,000. After the mortgage payoff, that's clean profit sitting in an account. You should be thanking me." I looked at my mother. She was still looking at her plate. I looked at my father. He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't apology. It was justification. He had already decided that Marcus was right. The family needed some financial help, my father said quietly. Marcus has been carrying a lot this past year. I heard the words, but they didn't fully land. I was still stuck 3 sentences back, turning over the phrase, "I sold your condo," like it was an object I couldn't identify. "You don't have the authority to sell my property," I said. "You're not on the deed. You're not my power of attorney. You're not anything." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I handled it. The details don't matter." "The details absolutely matter," I said. My voice was steady. "I don't know how. How did you sell property you don't own?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he said, "You were never going to come back to Phoenix. You were going to keep extending that contract, keep running away from real life." I made a practical decision. That was not your decision to make. My mother finally looked up. "Sweetheart, try to understand." "Don't," I said. Just that one word. She closed her mouth. I got up from the table and went to the guest room where my bags were, and I called Donna, my property manager. It went to voicemail. I called the HOA. No answer. It was evening. I pulled up my bank account. The rental income had stopped 3 months ago. I had noticed the gap but assumed it was a banking delay. I hadn't pressed because I trusted the system I had set up. I trusted the wrong people. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think clearly. I had been a nurse for 8 years. I had worked nights in trauma units. I had held the hands of people in the worst moments of their lives and kept my voice level and my mind organized. I used those same skills now, in a guest room that still had my old soccer trophies on the shelf, to keep myself from coming apart. I needed to understand exactly what had happened before I said another word. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office before it opened and waited outside in my rental car with a cup of gas station coffee. When the doors unlocked at 8, I was first in line. I asked for the deed history on my property address. What I found made my hands go cold. 3 months ago, a deed transfer had been recorded. My name as grantor. A couple named the Hendersons as grantees. Price, $375,000. And my signature or something that was meant to look like it on the transfer document. I photographed everything. I sat in my car in the parking lot and looked at my signature on that document for a long time. I have a particular way of signing my name, a habit from years of medical charting where every initial has to be precise and identifiable. The signature on that deed was close, but it was not mine. Marcus had forged it. I drove back to my parents' house. Marcus was still there. He had apparently been staying in my old room, another detail no one had mentioned. I found him in the kitchen making eggs, like it was a normal Tuesday. I put the photographs on the counter next to the stove. He glanced at them. He didn't even flinch. "You should talk to a lawyer," he said. "Oh, I'm going to," I said. "But first I want to understand something." "Did you forge my signature?" He turned back to the stove. I did what I had to do. I picked up my photographs and I left. My mother called me 4 times before I reached the end of the street. I didn't answer. My father texted me a paragraph about family loyalty and how Marcus had been struggling and how I needed to have compassion. I read it once, set my phone face down on the passenger seat, and kept driving. I found a real estate attorney that same afternoon, a woman named Patricia, who had a small office near downtown and a reputation, according to 3 separate Google reviews, for being ruthless in property fraud cases. She met with me for 2 hours. She looked at the documents. She asked me careful, specific questions. When I was done talking, she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is wire fraud, forgery, and unauthorized transfer of real property. This isn't a civil dispute. This is criminal." She also told me something I hadn't considered. The Hendersons, the couple who had purchased my condo, were almost certainly victims too. They had paid $375,000 for a property that had been sold to them fraudulently. Their title insurance would likely cover their loss, but they were entitled to know what had happened. She recommended I contact them. That call was one of the hardest things I've done, and I've worked 3 consecutive overnight shifts in a cardiac ICU. I found their number through the HOA directory. A woman answered, soft-voiced, maybe in her 60s. I introduced myself. There was a pause when I said my name. "You're the original owner," she said. "Yes," I said. "I need to tell you something, and I'm sorry in advance for what you're about to hear." She listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We knew something was off." The closing felt rushed. Our agent flagged 2 things that didn't sit right, but the seller, your brother, I suppose had an answer for everything. She paused. "We recorded one of our phone calls with him. I hope that helps you." I sat down on the curb outside a drugstore. "It helps," I said. "It helps a great deal." They had done the right thing by instinct, and it was going to matter more than either of us knew at that moment. Patricia filed a report with the Phoenix Police Department and contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Wire fraud triggers federal jurisdiction when the funds cross state lines, which they had. Marcus had transferred the sale proceeds into an account in Nevada. Within 10 days of my report, 2 agents came to my parents' house while I was not there. My mother called me crying. My father called me angry. Marcus didn't call at all. I found out later from Patricia, who had been in contact with the investigators, that Marcus had used 3 things to execute the fraud: a forged notarized document, a fake email chain he had constructed to make it appear I had authorized the sale, and a closing agent who, Patricia said bluntly, had failed to perform basic due diligence. The closing agent's negligence didn't make them a criminal, but it made them civilly liable. The title company's insurance was also on the hook. Patricia told me, in the measured tone that I was learning meant good news, that the path to recovery was cleaner than she had initially expected. "Your brother didn't spend all of it," she said. "He made some payments on personal debts, bought a car, but the majority is still traceable. The FBI is good at tracing." I asked about the Hendersons. She told me their title insurance had confirmed coverage and that they would not lose their home. They were allowed to stay while the legal proceedings sorted out ownership and compensation. The title insurance company would be seeking reimbursement from Marcus and the closing agent. I exhaled for what felt like the first time since I had sat down at that dinner table. The criminal case moved on its own timeline. Federal cases always do, but the civil resolution came faster. Patricia negotiated a settlement framework that required Marcus to liquidate the car he had purchased and surrender the remaining funds. The court placed a lien on any future income or assets he acquired. He would be paying back what he had taken for years. My parents hired their own attorney to argue they had no material involvement in the fraud. Technically, that was true. They hadn't signed anything, hadn't touched the money. But the investigators' questions apparently made clear that they had known what Marcus was planning and had chosen not to tell me. They were not charged. But they were not absolved in the way my father had imagined when he texted me about family loyalty. The day I got my property back, when the court voided the fraudulent transfer and the original deed was restored to my name, I drove to Phoenix alone. I parked in the spot that had always been mine, in the garage beneath my building, and I sat in the car for a while. The fluorescent lights hummed. Someone's bike was locked to a post nearby. It all looked exactly the same. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and unlocked my door with the spare key Donna had kept on file. The Hendersons had been considerate tenants. In the months they'd been there, the place was clean, everything where it should be. They had left a small note on the kitchen counter. It said, "We hope you get your home back fully. You deserved better than this." I folded it and kept it. I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the city I had saved to live in, the view I had signed papers for before flying halfway around the world to work double shifts in a foreign hospital. I had done everything right. I had planned and saved and trusted a system I built carefully. The only thing I hadn't planned for was my own brother. My parents have reached out several times since everything became final. My mother's messages are long and layered with a particular kind of grief that wants me to meet it halfway. My father's are shorter and still carry that undertone of "can't you see this was complicated?" I read them. I haven't responded. Some people in my life have asked if I'll forgive Marcus. I understand why they ask. Forgiveness sounds like the healthy ending, the mature resolution, the thing a person who has done inner work is supposed to offer. I'm not there. Maybe I'll get there. But what I know right now, standing in my own kitchen with my own keys in my hand, is that forgiveness is something I'll offer on my own timeline, not because someone else is uncomfortable with my silence. The contract in Qatar had 6 months remaining when all of this began. I finished it. I came back to Phoenix with my savings intact, my debt nearly gone, and a property that was mine again in every legal and literal sense. Donna set up a new tenant screening process. Patricia's number is still in my phone. I'm 31 years old. I own my home. I know exactly who I am and what I built, and what I will protect. And I know now with the kind of certainty that only comes from having it tested that the only person I can fully trust to look after what I've earned is myself.